My name is Mr. Cole, and every empire has a secret. It was the morning of December 11th, 2008, when two FBI agents knocked on the door of an apartment in New York. The man who opened the door was calm. He was wearing casual clothes, the kind you'd wear around the house, relaxed, unbothered, without a trace of anxiety. The agent stepped inside, took their seats, and asked, "Is there anything you'd like to tell us?" He took a deep breath and paused for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, it was all one big lie." That man was Bernard Lawrence Madoff, former chairman of NASDAQ, one of the most trusted names on Wall Street, the architect of a fraudulent investment empire worth $65 billion. This is the story of the largest private financial fraud in history. But it is also a story that asks something deeper. How does a system choose not to see? How does a society accept what it desperately wants to believe? And how can trust, in the wrong hands, become the most dangerous weapon in history? Today we open the Madoff file. 1960, Queens, New York. A 22-year-old man starts his own firm with $5,000 he saved working as a lifeguard. Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. Back then, everything on Wall Street ran on paper and pencil. Buy and sell orders were written by hand, relayed over the phone, and waited on for hours. Madoff found this inefficient. Together with his brother Peter, he developed an electronic trading system that transformed the market. Shares of smaller companies could now change hands far more quickly and transparently. That system would eventually become NASDAQ. And in 1990, Madoff became chairman of its board. He served on SEC committees, and market regulations were shaped with his input. He had become one of the most trusted names at the very center of the financial world. His investment advisory business earned its own kind of fame. Getting into the fund wasn't easy. Madoff turned away most requests, saying the capacity was full. Paradoxically, that rejection only made people want in more. In social psychology, this is known as the scarcity effect. The harder something is to access, the more valuable it seems. And the returns? Around 10% every year. Even when markets fell. Even when the dot-com bubble burst. Even through the 2001 crisis. Consistent, predictable, nearly perfect. Anyone who understands finance knows this. No strategy can produce the same return under every market condition. That is a mathematical fact. But Madoff's clients never asked. They didn't want to ask. They were winning. And after you're winning, what's the point of questioning anything? There is a skyscraper in Manhattan known as the Lipstick Building. On the 18th and 19th floors, Madoff's legitimate brokerage operations ran smoothly. Hundreds of employees, real transactions, real money. But very few people ever made it to the 17th floor. A small office, a team of 4 or 5. The place where the real fiction was written. The work carried out inside was remarkably simple. Each month, a return figure was decided upon for clients, and then fake transaction records were produced to justify it. Which stocks were bought, on which dates, at which prices, all of it invented. An old IBM computer, an ordinary accounting program. Over 2,300 client accounts, all fabricated. Clients' money was never invested in the stock market. It was all transferred to a single account at Chase Manhattan Bank. When the FBI examined that account during its subsequent investigation, it found that between 1986 and 2008, a total of $150 billion had flowed in and out. But not a single real investment had ever been made. Money came in, fake reports went out, some money left. As long as the system held, no one noticed. Clients received their monthly statements, saw the numbers, and felt reassured. After all, they were winning in a system they had entered to win. Jeffrey Katzenberg, the producer behind Shrek and Kung Fu Panda, said years later, "I first heard the name Madoff 3 weeks ago. What he did destroyed people's lives." Katzenberg had lost $20 million. Actors Kevin Bacon and Kira Sedgwick lost their entire savings. Nobel Peace Prize laureate Elie Wiesel had invested on the advice of a longtime trusted friend and lost everything in his foundation's account, $15 million. But the vast majority of victims were not famous names. According to data from the Madoff Victim Fund established by the U.S. Department of Justice, most victims were ordinary investors who lost an average of $250,000. Teachers who had tied their retirement accounts to him, families who had entrusted their savings, charitable foundations managing donated funds, nearly 41,000 people from 127 countries. How did Madoff deceive so many people for so long? The answer isn't purely financial, it's psychological. Dr. Clive Boddy, a researcher at Anglia Ruskin University, examined Madoff using two separate psychopathy scales in a study published in 2023. The findings were striking. Madoff displayed nearly every personality pattern associated with clinical psychopathy: superficial charm, absence of remorse, the ability to manipulate those around him, and a profound lack of empathy toward his victims. In other words, he possessed every quality required to do exactly what he did. In prison interviews, Madoff occasionally implied, "They were wealthy people anyway." That sentence laid bare the emptiness inside him. The vast majority of those 41,000 victims were not wealthy. But Madoff never internalized that. There is a concept in social psychology called the halo effect. A person's success and status in one area leads others to assume they are trustworthy across all areas. The NASDAQ chairmanship, the SEC committee roles, the decades of reputation on Wall Street, all of it formed an invisible shield around Madoff. People didn't question him because questioning would have meant shattering that halo. Now I ask you, if someone with all of those qualities stood in front of you, would they genuinely inspire your trust? Let me know in the comments. Years ago, I saw Madoff at an industry conference. Everyone in that room wanted to get close to him. I felt it too, that pull. His charisma was real. The confidence was real. The lie looked incredibly real. That's why telling this story matters today, because identifying people like this is far harder than we think. 1992. The SEC received its first formal complaint about Madoff. An investor had reported that one of Madoff's business partners was generating suspiciously consistent returns. The SEC opened an investigation. It examined the partner, not Madoff. Then it closed the file. In 2000, Harry Markopoulos walked into the SEC's Boston office. Markopoulos was an independent financial analyst who had begun looking into Madoff at a colleague's request. It took him 5 minutes to run the numbers. He then wrote, "These return figures are mathematically impossible. Either there is front-running or this is a Ponzi scheme." The SEC received that report and took no action. Markopoulos returned in 2001. Another source filed a complaint in 2003. In 2005, Markopoulos submitted a comprehensive 17-page report containing 30 red flags. The title was unambiguous: "The world's largest hedge fund is a fraud." The SEC received that report too, and once again did nothing. So why was nothing being done? A subsequent investigation by the U.S. Senate examined why the SEC had failed to act. The findings were embarrassing. Senior officials had deliberately narrowed the scope of investigations. Junior staff had been reluctant to question Madoff directly. And in the New York office, an informal policy had taken hold that treated investment advisory cases as outside their jurisdiction. Another detail adds to the picture. Eric Swanson, an assistant director at the SEC, met Madoff's niece Shana while investigating him in 2003. The two married in 2007. Investigators found no direct evidence that the relationship influenced the investigation. but it is a striking illustration of how easily the line between regulator and regulated can blur. In its internal review published in 2009, the SEC acknowledged, "Sufficient information existed since 1992. Had a proper investigation been conducted, this fraud could have been uncovered years earlier." Madoff had not only deceived his investors, he had deceived the very system charged with overseeing him. He appeared to have neutralized every obstacle that could have stood in his way. The autumn of 2008, the beginning of a crisis that touched everyone's life. Lehman Brothers collapsed. Bear Stearns was gone. AIG was rescued by government intervention. The global financial system was scrambling to hold itself together. Panicked investors began pulling their money from everywhere, including from Madoff. Within a short time, $7 billion in redemption requests had accumulated. But the Chase Manhattan account held only $300 million. December 3, 2008. Madoff pulled aside his closest associate, Frank DiPasquale. "I'm out of money." The system he had operated for 40 years had been crushed under the weight of the 2008 crisis. New money had stopped coming in. The math no longer worked. December 10, 2008. At the firm's annual Christmas party, Madoff handed out early bonuses to his staff. That evening, he went home with his sons, Mark and Andrew. That night, for the first time, he told his family the truth, that everything had been one enormous lie, that he had built a massive Ponzi scheme, and that he could no longer sustain it. Mark and Andrew Madoff called a lawyer that same night. The lawyer contacted federal prosecutors the following morning. On the morning of December 11th, the FBI came to the door. "Is there any fraud here?" they asked. Madoff answered, "Yes, and I have no excuse for it." $65 billion, 40 years, 41,000 victims from 127 countries. The largest private Ponzi scheme in history ended with a confession from its own architect. June 29, 2009. Judge Denny Chin announced a sentence of 150 years in prison. He framed his reasoning this way: "The message must be clear here. Mr. Madoff's crimes were extraordinarily evil." The maximum sentence. Effectively, life. Judge Chin made another notable observation during the same hearing. Not a single family member or friend had come forward to offer a character reference for Madoff. That silence, in Chin's own words, was telling. His son Mark took his own life in December 2010, exactly 2 years to the day after his father's arrest. He was 46. His other son Andrew died of cancer in 2014. He was 48. His brother Peter served 10 years in prison and, along with his family, lost everything, their home and savings exceeding $10 million, through forfeiture orders. The compensation process for Madoff's victims stretched over a decade. The Madoff Victim Fund, established by the U.S. Department of Justice, distributed a total of $4.3 billion to 40,843 victims across 10 separate payment rounds. Court-appointed trustee Irving Picard separately recovered approximately $14 billion through another process, covering the substantial majority of the real money that had been invested. Madoff died in a federal prison in North Carolina in April 2021. He was 82. He had requested early release in 2020, citing kidney failure. It was denied. He remained behind bars until his last breath. What do we take from this story? Madoff's victims were not naive or careless people. Nobel Prize-winning intellectuals, Hollywood producers, the most seasoned names on Wall Street, decades-old institutional investors. All of them were deceived. When researchers examined why, 2 factors consistently emerged: the halo effect and confirmation bias. People question the actions of high-status individuals far less, and they accept information that confirms their expectations while ignoring what contradicts it. Madoff understood this intuitively. He didn't appeal to greed, he appealed to the need for security. He didn't say, "I'll make you rich." He said, "I'll keep you safe." And people carry an extraordinarily powerful motivation to feel safe. But perhaps the most important lesson is this: institutions can fail just as individuals can. The SEC sat on its evidence for 16 years without acting. That is a reminder that no oversight mechanism can replace personal scrutiny and independent thought. If something looks too good to be true, asking that question is not your right. It is your responsibility. This was Rogue Capital. Every empire has a secret, and we open them. You can subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be the first to know when the next empire falls. Take care of yourself and never